Rifle first, blue, go. Go, 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 go. Move, move.
What happens when a real-life murder scene gets captured on camera? Oftentimes, criminals try to get away from the consequences of their actions. But thanks to these vital footage, investigators don't have to look too far to determine who the perpetrator is. In this video, we will take you through 15 murders that were actually caught on camera. From politicians who got killed live on TV to horrific murders caught on doorbell cameras. These are some of the most disturbing footages ever recorded. Number 15. The murder of Allison Parker and Adam Ward on live TV. What's wilder than getting a murder on camera? Seeing it play out on live TV. The people of Roanoke, Virginia were treated to a gory scene on August 26, 2015, when reporter Allison Parker and cameraman Adam Ward were murdered as the WDBJ-7 station broadcast. Parker had been interviewing Vicki Gardner, who was also injured in the shooting. The man behind the shooting was Vester Lee Flanagan, a former employee of the same TV station Parker and Ward worked at. But what could have driven this man to such madness? Was there a motive behind this senseless killing? As soon as the news spread, people started coming out to confirm that indeed he was a man of questionable character. Apparently, the relationship between Flanagan and the victims wasn't your usual cordial colleague relationship. According to many others who had worked with Flanagan, he was a real hothead. His terrible personality even got him fired from other TV stations he had previously worked in California, Tallahassee, and Florida. By the time of this murder, Flanagan had amassed a mountain load of legal complaints arising from office disputes. But why did he have a personal beef with the duo that got murdered? Turns out Parker may have been the reason Flanagan was fired from WDB-7. You see, it seems both of them had had quite a rough experience, and Parker ended up reporting him to HR, which got him fired. However, Flanagan believes he's the victim here. According to him, this was a case of racism. He believed that everyone in the office picked on him because of his race. This man even supposedly made a 23-page manifesto. He claimed the murders were in response to the massacre of 9 African Americans in a church in Charleston, South Carolina. As the investigations continued, it was discovered that he even had a Facebook page opened under his pseudonym Bryce Williams, on which he posted several cryptic photos and the video of the gunman's point of view as he approached Parker and Ward. A nationwide manhunt was soon launched, and by 11:30 a.m. on the same day, Flanagan's car was spotted on Interstate 66, and as they tried to pull him over, he refused to stop. This resulted in a high-speed chase that eventually resulted in a crash. As soon as he realized he couldn't run anymore, he decided to take his own life. When officers found his car, they found him with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. But he would not die on the spot. He actually made it to the hospital and died a while later. Number 14. The murder of Nizama Hasimovich. Not everyone can obtain the access to showcase their evil plans on live TV. Some choose to live stream it instead. Let us introduce you to Nermin Sulejmanovic, who not only murdered his ex-wife in the presence of their baby daughter, he also streamed it live on Instagram. Sulejmanovic was a bodybuilder and fitness instructor from the Bosnian town of Gradac. Apparently, he was married to Nizama, and their marriage hit the rocks. On this fateful day, Sulejmanovic came on Instagram to announce that his followers were about to witness an execution. At first, everyone was puzzled as to what he meant, but it wouldn't take long before they would all find out. After making his creepy announcement, the crazed maniac then panned the camera towards his wife, who was tied to a chair and was now absolutely unrecognizable. From the bruises on her face and the severe injuries she had suffered, it seemed Sulejmanovic had initially physically assaulted her, beating her to a pulp. But this was not enough for him. He was not done. Then, right in the presence of about 12,000 spectators who were watching the live stream, Sulejmanovic pulled out a gun and shot his ex-wife right in the head. The shot rang loud, and everybody was left in absolute shock. You could hear the piercing screams of their little girl in the background. In the video, Sulejmanovic admitted that the reason he had chosen to callously end the life of his ex-wife was because she had kept his child from him for 8 days. But this man was not done killing people. He had more mayhem in mind. So he ran into the streets and started shooting sporadically. His murderous rampage ended in the killing of a father and his son, and a police officer also suffered a non-lethal injury. By the time the chase was over, the bodybuilder took his own life before he could be apprehended. Further investigation into his person revealed that he was so much more than a bodybuilder. Matter of fact, he had been arrested many times in the past, and for a wild assortment of crimes ranging from drug possession to smuggling to even attacking a police officer. It was even discovered that he was a member of an infamous gang that often caused rampage and mayhem in the area. Unfortunately, his innocent ex-wife had to bear the brunt of his last anger, right in front of thousands of people. But if you thought this story was tragic, wait until you see what comes next. Number 13. The murder of a K.A. On February 10, 2023, news of the death of one of South Africa's leading rap artists hit the airwaves. Everybody scrambled to confirm or debunk the news. Most people prayed and hoped it was fake news. But when the CCTV footage of the shooting came out, everyone couldn't argue about the authenticity of the claims anymore. In this footage, Keenan Forbes, or AKA as many people knew him, was standing with a couple of friends outside a restaurant in the city of Durban when an unknown gunman crept up behind him, put a gun to his head, and shot him at point-blank range. Every single person around was shocked, and many ducked for cover because they didn't know where the shot came from. The shooter then quickly sprinted away from the scenes, leaving everyone in disarray. By the time the smoke had cleared, one of South Africa's hottest rappers was dead. But that's not all. AKA's close friend, chef, and entrepreneur Thobela Tibbs Matswane was also killed in the deadly shooting, making this a double loss for the community. There were so many questions, and the hottest one was who was responsible for the shooting. Was this 35-year-old superstar a victim of gang violence? Was this a hit? Who ordered the hit? Why? The public had so many questions, many of which still remain unanswered. The world held its breath with teary eyes as the police continued their investigation into the senseless killings. But there's some good news, and serious progress has been made in the investigations. They've been able to retrieve the murder weapon and the getaway car, and they even claim to have identified the shooter. Although they are keeping some of their findings hush-hush, which is quite understandable because what we're dealing with here is a high-profile case. So South Africans and everyone else around the world eagerly await the revelations of some of their findings. Hopefully, the perpetrators of this heinous crime will be brought to book sooner than later. Number 12. 2022 Buffalo Shooting. Who could forget one of the most tragic events of 2022? A racially motivated mass shooting, which resulted in the death of 10 African Americans in Buffalo, New York. Admittedly, there were so many mass shootings in the United States in 2022 that it was so hard to keep up. But this one in particular stood out for its brutality, and of course, the fact that it was captured on camera. On May 14, 2022, an 18-year-old male by the name of Peyton S. Gendron took to the live streaming platform Twitch to take his followers on a wild ride with him. But this was no clout chaser. Gendron went out with the singular intention of hurting people. In the video obtained, you can see as he pulls up into a top-friendly market supermarket, located in the East Side neighborhood at about 2:30 in the afternoon. Now, this area has a high population of black people, which was probably why Gendron selected it as his target. In the video, Gendron brandishes his high-grade weapons, which he packed as though he was going to war. As he pulled into the parking lot of the store, his plan was to go on a murderous rampage and stream it live on Twitch. Gendron first shot 4 people in the parking lot, killing 3 of them. By this time, Twitch had shut down his stream, but he kept going anyway. He proceeded into the store to continue his mass execution and shot 8 people, killing 6 of them. As former Buffalo police officer Aaron Salter Jr., who was now an armed security guard, tried to shoot Gendron, his thick body armor stopped the bullet. It was as though this teenager was prepared for every possible scenario. Gendron returned fire, and Salter was killed on the spot. Then he proceeded to aim his gun at a white person who was hiding behind the counter, at which point he realized his mistake and apologized. This served as one of the many indications that revealed that this was indeed racially motivated. By 2:26 p.m., the police officers were able to talk him into putting his gun down, and he was then subsequently arrested and charged with first-degree murder. You will not believe what happened next. As soon as the trial began, Gendron entered a plea of not guilty, which was pretty surprising to everyone. Luckily, his gimmicks didn't work, and even though his lawyers tried, he was found guilty of all the charges against him, including murder, domestic terrorism, and hate crimes. Gendron is currently serving 11 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, and the federal charges against him are still ongoing. Number 11. Atiku Ahmed, shot dead on live TV. Atiku Ahmed was a former Indian MP who had been convicted of many crimes and was serving time in prison when he got murdered on April 15, 2023. To be honest, Atiku Ahmed was not really everybody's favorite person. He had his hands in almost every single illegal activity you could think of. From kidnappings to assault to murder, this guy did everything. For years, allegations had been piling up against him like a mountain, but he had the police in his pocket, so he often evaded facing the consequences of his actions. But eventually, the long arms of the law caught up with him, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment. But it wasn't within the prison walls that this man lost his life. On this fateful day, Atiku Ahmed and his brother Ashraf Ahmed were being escorted by the police outside of a hospital in Prayagraj, in the North Indian state of Uttar Pradesh. In case you're wondering how the shooters were able to carry out their mission, even with the heavy police presence, here's a breakdown of the events. The three men who were later identified as the shooters were 22-year-old Lavlesh Tiwari, 23-year-old Mohit Purani, and 18-year-old Kunar Maurya. According to the police report, the three men had arrived at the scene on motorcycles, posing as journalists. They even had a camera, which was brandished with the logo of a TV station everyone was familiar with, so you know this was a well-planned op. As the shooters moved close to Ahmed and the police officers, pretending to interview the man and his brother Ashraf Ahmed, who also lost his life in the shooting. Within the blink of an eye, the gunmen brought out their guns and opened fire. 20 close-range shots later, and Atiku and Ashraf were lying dead on the floor. The men quickly surrendered to the police after the shooting and were taken into custody. Just like that, the drama was over. When asked what motivated the murder, the men claimed that they had been following the brothers for 2 days, as they wanted to eliminate them in order to wipe out the entire Atiq Ashraf gang and make a name for themselves. A judicial investigation has been launched into the matter, and a report is set to be released soon. Number 10. Homeless man shot on the sidewalk. Ready for another spine-chilling murder story caught on camera, this one is even more disturbing than many of those you've seen in this video. On February 27, 2013, a bystander recorded the moment when a man named Deshaun Thomas brutally murdered a homeless man who was later identified as David Saldana, right on the sidewalk at St. Louis Street, Missouri. What's more, the murder was committed in broad daylight, and the lackadaisical attitude with which the cold-blooded killer perpetrated the act made the footage even more horrifying. It was about 10 a.m. on this fateful day, and Thomas could be seen talking casually on the phone as he loaded his gun. David Saldana just sat down on the floor with his hands over his ears. Before you could say Jack Robinson, a shot rang, and Saldana was lying in a pool of his own blood. The murder was so cold and calculated, and the footage aroused so much emotion and rage when it began to spread online. But how did we get here? Well, according to witnesses, both men had had an altercation earlier. Saldana, who was diagnosed with a mental illness, had been undergoing treatment for about a decade. Before his ordeal started, he was a successful businessman, and his future seemed to be very bright. No one can really tell what made him snap, but at the time of his death, Saldana was just a shadow of the man he used to be. Shortly after the shooting, Deshaun Thomas was caught outside of the public library. Luckily for the police, they didn't have to do too much, as the murder weapon, along with the shell casing, was still in his possession. Nobody can really tell if the two men knew each other prior to the altercation, but according to locals, the area was a hotspot for shootings. Number 9. The murder of Delia Johnson. In August 2021, a 42-year-old woman by the name of Delia Johnson was brutally murdered, while she was hanging out with a couple of friends on a stoop in Brooklyn. According to the CCTV footage, the shooter had approached her from the back, pulled out a gun, and fired multiple shots at close range. She died on the spot. What followed was a heavy manhunt that had the police looking for a male suspect. This is where things get a bit interesting. You see, as the cops tried to fish out who perpetrated this evil act, the real killer, a woman named Claudia Banton, actually fell right into their arms. But apparently the police thought the shooter was a male, and they let her go. It was much later in November before she was arrested. In the video, you can see Banton calmly exiting the scene and entering a white SUV that was parked nearby. But what could have led to this senseless murder? Did these two women have an altercation prior to the incident? According to the victim's murder, Claudia Banton was actually a family friend. So what could have led to such a tragic confrontation? To be very honest, we haven't really figured that out yet. Banton, whose criminal record is pretty prolific, has now been charged with second-degree murder and criminal possession of a weapon. She could be facing some serious time in jail, probably about 25 years to life. The family of the deceased and the general public are closely following the case. Hopefully, very soon, justice will be served. Number 8. Elizabeth Barraza murdered while setting up a yard sale. You will agree that we've seen some pretty disturbing footage in this video, but this one you're about to watch kicks it up a notch. The year was 2019, and Elizabeth Barraza and her husband were getting ready for a vacation to celebrate their 5th wedding anniversary. They were both very excited and eagerly anticipated the trip, but unfortunately, it never happened. On January 25, 2019, just a couple of days before they were supposed to travel, Elizabeth decided to set up a yard sale so she could make some extra cash for the vacation. As she began to set up her wares in the driveway, her husband pulled out of the driveway and headed out. A couple of minutes later, a pickup truck pulled up close to the victim's home, and an unidentified suspect stepped out of the vehicle approaching Elizabeth. The doorbell camera captures some faint audio, probably Elizabeth saying hello to the female suspect. So this was probably someone she knew. This was when things took a pretty dramatic second. Within a couple of seconds, the woman pulled out a gun and fired 4 shots at Elizabeth at point-blank range. To show that this was not just some random shooting, the suspect even checks to make sure that Elizabeth is, in fact, dead. As you would expect, everybody started pointing fingers at the husband because, of course, in every homicide case, the partner is always the first suspect. But he was released after questioning and has been cleared of any suspicion. Another crazy part of this story is that even though there is recorded footage of the incident, this suspect seemed to have vanished into thin air. No headway has been made in the investigation since 2019, and there is even a $50,000 reward for anyone willing to come forward with useful information. But if anyone knows anything about this murder, they're probably keeping it to themselves. Number 7. Nashville school shooting. A couple of crazy things have happened in 2023, and one of them, which was so horrifying it made international headlines, was the deadly mass shooting in a private Christian school in Nashville. Let's take you back to this incident, which became a subject of intense debate and, of course, a meme war earlier in 2023. What made this even more horrifying was that the shooting took place in an elementary school. Imagine the level of cruelty that would permeate a person's heart for them to decide to assault a school full of children, guns blazing. Police responded to the scenes on March 27, 2023, as the suspect, identified as a 28-year-old woman by the name of Audrey Hale, went into the school guns blazing, shooting at anyone in sight. Apparently, she was a former student and harbored a grudge against the school, which led to the deadly shooting. Luckily, the police were able to infiltrate the premises, and before long, Audrey Hale was taken down. But she didn't go down without a fight. At the end of her rampage, 6 people, including 3 9-year-olds, were dead. The event rekindled the ongoing debates on gun reforms in America, but it seems nothing has been done about it since then. And day in, day out, more Americans become victims of gun violence. We can only hope that one day policymakers will do what's right and end the menace of gun violence once and for all. Number 6. The murder of Ben Moncrief. The streets of the Southgate area of Bath, England was lit up with police lights and sirens at around 3:30 a.m. on May 6, 2023, as officers responded to the scenes of a fatal stabbing. The conditions surrounding this occurrence are pretty blurry, and CCTV footage does not exactly capture the moment of the stabbing. But eyewitnesses claim that the suspect, who will not be named for legal reasons, acted on purpose. But what form of altercation could have led to such a tragedy? Well, according to officials, the 15-year-old suspect and his friends had been denied entry to a McDonald's because they were using laughing gas. What followed was a brawl and a stabbing that ended the life of 18-year-old Ben Moncrief. The most eerie part of this story is that the suspect claims he was acting in self-defense and that he was just holding the knife, but the victim decided to plunge his body into it. But according to the victim's family, he was an easygoing young man who brought love and joy to everyone he came in contact with. The case has only recently come to a close, and to the relief of the victim's family and many other observers around the world, the suspect was found guilty. Sentencing is due to take place on December 6, but nobody can really tell how long this guy will be going away for. Now, it's time for today's subscriber pick. The murder of Delia Johnson is one of the poignant examples of a brutal murder caught on camera. This African-American woman had been out with her friends, unaware of the terrible fate that was about to befall her when the killer crept up behind her and shot her straight in the head. Even more intriguing is the fact that the killer, Claudia Banton, had slipped right out of the hands of the officers who were investigating the case. Thankfully, CCTV footage revealed that Banton had indeed murdered Johnson in cold blood. But what if there was no surveillance footage? Would the case have been solved so easily, or would the suspect still be walking free as we speak? Let us know what you think in the comments. Now, back to the video. Number 5. The unsolved murder of Maurice Gatson. Sometimes murder cases can remain unsolved for many years, even in the presence of video evidence. The tragic death of Maurice Gatson is one of such cases that has continued to evade the long arms of justice. Follow us back to October 3, 2015, when Portland police officers responded to a report that someone had been shot outside the Palace Club, located on Powell Boulevard. The victim of this shooting was a 45-year-old man by the name of Maurice Anthony Gatson. When police arrived on the scene, they found him lying in a pool of blood, and it was obvious that he had been shot multiple times. In the surveillance footage, you can clearly see the shooter as he walked toward Gatson, who was just casually walking in front of the strip club. The shooter then brought out his gun, once he was close enough, and fired straight at Gatson, who fell to the floor immediately. But since then, nobody has still been able to figure out who this mysterious shooter was. Was he a friend? An associate? Or someone Gatson had an altercation with? We don't really know yet. But officials are hopeful that someday soon, someone will come forward with useful information that will help bring the killer to justice, giving closure to the victim's family. Number 4. The murder of 24-year-old Ryan Polaire. Sometimes the justice system pardons hardened criminals, releasing them back into the society to cause even more mayhem. This was the case with 32-year Michael Daniels. This guy was a regular at the court and had often been charged, mostly for domestic violence and some other related aggressive behaviors. No one really knows why, but he seemed to always slip out of any troubled spot he finds himself. That was until he murdered his ex-wife's boyfriend, Ryan Polaire. Daniels' wife had left him after enduring years of merciless abuse and violence and had moved on with Polaire. This didn't sit well with Daniels, and as the kind of man that he is, he wasn't willing to just sit by and let it slide. So on November 7, 2021, he went looking for Polaire. When he found him riding his motorcycle, Daniels intentionally slammed into him with his car at high speed, killing him. It was all caught on camera. He was actually free on bail and was even wearing an ankle monitor at the time. He had been arrested for choking his wife almost to death once, threatening to kill her, her new boyfriend, and her dad, but he kept getting released. His case is still undergoing trial, and many people hope this crazed maniac will finally be brought to justice. Number 3. The unsolved case of Daniel Vesper. How did a simple drive meant to serve as alone time after a heated domestic dispute end in the murder of the husband? This case you're about to watch is one of the most tragic cases in this video, And adding to the tragedy is the fact that the shooter has managed to evade arrest for 16 years. On this fateful day, Daniel Vesper and his wife got into a little argument, and in order to cool off, Daniel left their home and drove to a convenience store nearby. A couple of seconds later, he called his teenage son and asked if he was doing okay. They spoke for a few seconds, and Jason got into his car. This was about 12:17 a.m. At 12:56 a.m., a security camera showed Jason stopped at an intersection, where he seemed to have engaged in an argument with another driver, who may have pulled a little close to his car. Surveillance footage then shows him circling back and returning to the intersection just a little while later. Only this time, he didn't stop at the stop sign and kept blazing through the night traffic as the other driver he had encountered at the intersection drove right after him. The driver seemed to be trying to get Jason to pull over, but he kept going. Eventually, he stopped for about 15 seconds at 14th and Avenue F, where authorities believe the suspect stabbed him 16 times. Unfortunately, this murderer is still at large, and it remains unclear what the motive behind this senseless killing was. Unfortunately, although Jason's every move was captured on surveillance cameras, the bitter cold of the Nebraska night made it pretty impossible to identify any faces from all the footage recovered. Number 2. The murder of billionaire Barry Sherman and his wife. When the bodies of billionaire Barry Sherman and his wife Honey Sherman were discovered in their Toronto mansion, everyone from family members to business partners and competitors became potential suspects. Although the details of their murder are pretty murky, the style in which they were murdered seemed like someone was trying to make a statement. After murdering them, the unidentified suspect propped up their bodies in a sitting position, positioned them side by side with belts looped around their necks and fastened to the railing behind them. The big question at the time was who would have perpetrated such an evil act, but the list was very, very long. As he rose in ranks in the business world, Sherman had amassed quite a bit of a reputation for being a very ruthless businessman. Because of this, he had made many enemies, and no one could really tell who did it. At a point, even his son became implicated in the case, although he vehemently denied any involvement. Although there are footage surrounding the event, no one has been identified in the case. Even though it has been many, many years since this incident, it still remains one of the unsolved mysteries that has left investigators with more questions than answers. Number 1. Husband pushes wife off a cliff. This selfie was taken moments before the man in the picture, Haka Aysal, pushed his pregnant wife Semra Aysal off a 1,000-foot cliff. This was back in 2018, and although the moment of disaster was not captured on camera, eyewitnesses reported that the husband was being a bit pushy and suspicious. He had lured his wife to the edge of the cliff at Butterfly Valley in the Turkish province of Muğla. He had claimed that he wanted to take a picture of her, but it turns out he had something sinister in mind. Hakan was 7 months pregnant at the time, and it was later discovered that the murder was in a bid to cash in on an insurance policy he had taken in his wife's name. But that's not even the worst part of this story. During the investigations, it was later discovered that Haka had taken out many loans in his wife's name and must have been looking for a way to get rid of her. Although he vehemently denied any involvement in the death of his wife, the evidence was too overwhelming, and he was eventually sentenced to life imprisonment. Thanks for watching, but before we go, here's a question for you. Would you rather erase a surveillance footage that could solve a huge murder case by mistake, or realize once it is too late that you should have reported that screaming you heard from your neighbor's house to the police? Let us know in the comments below. See you in the next video.